the next presentation is from Shawna Hett. You're there, Shawna. So over to you.
Thank you. My presentation is on ecological grief, our relationship with loss of our sacred environment, and identifying the emotion of grief in the destruction of nature. So I come to you now at sunrise in my time zone on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Lukan, Suk, and Cowichan people, known as Vancouver Island, BC, Canada, where Mount Zuhalem meets the Cowichan River, where I live and where the eagles nest, and the river runs into the Pacific Northwest Ocean. Here, the largest and oldest trees on the planet have flourished for thousands of years, known as one of the wonders of the world. This temperate rainforest between the Pacific Ocean and the coastal mountain range of the Rockies is one of the most rare and endangered ecosystems on the planet. It has the highest biomass of any living ecosystem because of the large trees, with thousands of biodiverse organisms, plants, and animals living among the large, great lungs of our planet. In a moment, I'm going to share with you 2 short videos with the footage taken during the last 6 months of what is happening in this area at Asuktik, known as Fairy Creek here on the island, where the last remaining 2% of the ancient intact forest watershed in Canada remains. This is also the last 2% of the temporal old-growth forest in the world. The videos contain a true story and authentic images that tell of the modern-day destruction of land through devastating industrial practices and the issue of greed and modern-day demands on the resources of our planet. These trees are 1,000, 2,000, and some 3,000-year-old trees. Due to grossly managed clear-cut logging practices, as well as government-sanctioned logging in this ancient, sacred, old-growth rainforest, are being destroyed. In this destruction are also thousands of rare species of vulnerable forest undercarriage that are becoming extinct. The devastation are also destroying streams and riverbeds from silt runoff, and log jams that are devastating spawning grounds for salmon, which in turn are destroying hundreds of thousands of wild animals and marine life that depend on the salmon. In the last year and a half, there's been direct protests and blockades in action to save these trees. Over 1,200 arrests and over 300 legal catch and release violations to biologists, speakers, medicine people, and media. I was one. What I'm not bringing out due to time in the presentation is the spiritual and cultural significance of these sacred and ancient trees, known as the grandmother and grandfather trees, known as our elders. The ancient rainforest on ancestral Paditach and Didadat territories is known as the sacred mountain. Elder Bill Jones, who was 85, invited all people to come and help, and all people of every creed, color, and background came. This is also an act of colonization on the land grab and disrespect to sacred practices of Indigenous people. The protest is led by elders, Indigenous youth, and largely a women's movement. People literally live in the bush, making blockades and camps across the logging roads. The significant attempt to halt the logging into Fairy Creek watershed has become the largest running civil disobedient campaign in Canadian history. Today marks 450th day. In the deep respect for grief and sorrow during this degradation and destruction facing us now upon the earth, we must face and take time to feel and breathe deeply into the grief. Over the past several years, I have been looking into stories and songs and prayers from the ancient lands of my ancestors, and to call forward the ancient feminine ways of sorrow and grief. Songs and sounds of past cultural practices to bring us back into relationship with the natural world. In the two short videos that I'll be presenting, these sounds and songs are of these old and ancient sounds and songs that are actually as old as the ancient trees. They're carrying grief rituals and sounds in these songs. I personally come from several clans. First Nation West Coast Sioux clan in the neighboring territory of Fairy Creek, a West Coast Finnish Bear clan, Scottish Highlands near the west coast of Glenelg, west coast of Ireland, and southern England. And these videos comprise of the sounds and songs of my cultural background that have been intermingled into ancient prayer hymns, which are referred to as grieving songs or sorrow or crying sounds, also known as an indigenous cultural crying sounds and grieving songs. These sounds and songs are a way of connecting to old worship, old land worship. Some of these songs and sounds are passed through generations that have come down through thousands of miles on the hearts of immigrants. And some of the songs are from the very soul in which they are originated. Songs themselves carry their own spirit. The first of these the first video will be brief sounds of a home and a van and ovan, ov, traditional sounds of grief from these indigenous cultures. And they're dedicated to the ancient ones, the grandmother and grandfather trees. The second video is an Irish Gaelic song that's called Grief, well, that I wrote called Grief, but it's it's a poem with a Finnish keen overtone. And it's dedicated to the diverse eco-living systems of thousands of unique and rare species and organisms, insects, plants, and lichens in the undercarriage of the old-growth forests that are becoming extinct. So I invite you to turn up your volume and view these two short videos.
Yes, Sarah.
Hi, Shawna. Hi, Shawna. I love your work. I love these songs, and your singing of them, I think, is incredible. I'm always really disturbed when I see the Grandmother Forest video, however, by the images that go with it, because they are so, for me, aesthetically, they're so different from your song, and they're so slick, and so much technology and money has been used to produce the images. They're incredibly high quality, really, really good images. How did the images come about to go with that song? I'd be really interested if you could just talk through a bit about your involvement in that editing process, and perhaps some of the decisions that you made.
Sure. Well, fortunately, I know a lot of filmmakers, and a lot of them are up there right now because this is a big deal here. And so I was very lucky to be able to go up there and call on some of those filmmakers and ask them if I could use pieces of their footage. Some of the footage, believe it or not, I actually took. And my daughter, who's also a photographer, took. And it was really hard to condense it down into something very small and compact. It went in 1,000 different directions many times. I have about four more videos worth of footage. I think because I wanted to, for what was happening here, I really wanted to emphasize, the logging in one and then the undercarriage in the other one. So tried to get footage. Actually, the one I sent Richard on the Google Drive is actually different again. It has different footage of the undercarriage. There's been so many biologists up there, so many scientists up there taking footage and trying to convince the government of what's happening in the destruction, that I've been able to hang out with these folks and learn what the rare species are and then grab their footage from them. Everybody's been extremely generous to make it very public so that we could bring awareness to this issue. I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah. The one at the end where Grandma Rose is drumming, that's all of us in a circle. And that's a woman's warrior song. It's a traditional song around here. Yeah, there's lots. Again, I have so much footage of peace pipe ceremonies and like all sorts of, parades and protests. It's just, trying to condense it down into something that was, that could make a quick message. I also had help from a friend who took all my ideas, the different tracks, the vocal tracks that I did, the different instrumentals that I did, the different images, and he helped me put it all together. I'm not that technical. So I actually hired him to help me throw that whole thing together. Not throw it, but place it all neatly together.
Thanks, Shawna. I think we just have time for Esther's question. And then if people have other questions or comments, perhaps you could put them in the chat for Shawna. So Esther.
Shawna, I loved it. Thank you for sharing. It was moving and powerful. And I've got lots of questions, but I'll stick to one. I wondered, could you talk about whether you found there were any ethical or moral ambiguities or conflicts for you in harnessing these songs and trying, and you used the phrase to get down a quick message, like bringing these into an MA, bringing them to Dartington, getting a quick message, using the mediums that you've been given to use. Were there edges in this, and how were you supported through it at Dartington and in your community? I'm just curious about how these worlds meet, really.
Well, for one thing, all of the songs that I learned are all done orally. They're all done through traditional tradition keepers, whether they were First Nation songs or, there's some that are Gaelic, Irish, and also Scots Gaelic. So they were all done through I was very, very lucky that I grew up with grandmothers and great grandmothers of these cultures that also taught me many songs, but I went back to those tradition keepers and asked for coaching to make sure that I had the languaging down. The First Nation songs I cannot share because First Nation songs are you have to have permission to share them publicly, and they're not normally shared publicly. Some of the older songs that I've done that were passed down to me, that were Irish or Scots Gaelic, are very, very old. And so they're already in public domain. in terms of sharing. And yeah, it's something that's been dear to my heart for many years. And when I came to Dartington, actually, it was after the loss of my particular land. And I went back and traveled into those cultures, to Finland, to England, to Ireland, to Scotland, where my ancestors came from, because all I heard is stories and songs about the loss of their lands through colonizational processes. And so for me, it was going back to their land. I was the first person to go back after, they immigrated to Canada, and to walk their lands and to hear those songs and stories in my head that I grew up with. It's a big grieving process. I must say I've had a lot of grief in my life. I've lost a child, I've lost a husband, I have had a lot of grief, and losing that piece of land was as big as losing a beloved person in my life. So the grief that the family lineage carried about the grief of loss of land has always been huge. And and that's what I needed to bring from my own personal life. I needed to go back and walk those lands and feel the grief of those losses personally before I felt like I could move forward again in my own personal life.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Shawna. Thank you, and thanks for the questions.